You are 8 years old, standing in a cathedral that does not feel like a place of worship but a tomb dressed in gold. The stone beneath your bare feet bites into your skin, and every breath tastes of incense and iron, as though the air itself has been mixed with blood. The ring sliding over your tiny hand does not belong to you. It is too large, too heavy, a chain disguised as a jewel. The boy beside you is only 13, his face pale with fear, his lips trembling as though he too realizes this is no wedding, it is a sentencing. Your name is Agnes of France, and before you are old enough to even understand the meaning of love, you are given away as an offering. They call it alliance. They call it destiny. But in truth, it is the auctioning of a child's flesh to feed the hunger of kings. History tells you this was a marriage, but history lies. It was a contract inked in blood, written by men who spoke of God while dealing like merchants in a marketplace. The Byzantine ambassadors arrived with gifts, silks shimmering like stolen light, gold manuscripts that blinded the eye, spices that suffocated the air, and with every glittering object placed on the table, the price of your childhood grew cheaper. They tell us these were gestures of diplomacy, but look closer, it was nothing more than a calculated purchase. You were currency, and the Kingdom of France was your broker. The ceremony itself was theater, nothing more. A child asked to give consent is not a bride, she is a prisoner. And yet, the priests intoned their sacred words, the nobles whispered their approval, and the crowd nodded as though what they were witnessing was holy. But holiness had nothing to do with it. Power did. The empire needed a new chain of survival, and you, barely old enough to braid your hair, became its link. This is how corruption hides, beneath sacred hymns, beneath jeweled crowns, beneath the illusion of tradition. They will tell you these things were for the good of nations, for the balance of empires. But strip away the incense smoke and the ritual, and what do you see? A child stolen from herself. A life rewritten before it began. A system where innocence is the first sacrifice on the altar of power. And as the ring tightens against your bone, as the eyes of 1,000 shadows press against your small frame, you understand something most grown men never do: freedom is never given, it is always taken. Agnes was not born into freedom. She was born into a contract that predated her ability to speak. By the time she took her first steps, her path was already carved by men sitting in smoky halls, negotiating not her childhood but the borders of kingdoms. Her father, Louis VII of France, haunted by his failures in the Crusades and desperate to salvage his legacy, found in her not a daughter, but a weapon. A living pawn in a game where faith and empire cloaked the raw hunger for survival. The Byzantine Empire, though still magnificent in its marble splendor, was cracking. Italian merchants carved away its wealth, Turkish forces pressed against its borders, and its rulers, draped in silk and ceremony, feared collapse with every passing year. They did not need a bride, they needed a lifeline. And so they reached across continents, not for an alliance of equals, but for a child who could be reshaped into their image, stripped of origin, and rebuilt as their own. The deal was dressed in magnificence. Silks that shimmered like stolen stars. Manuscripts edged with gold. Pearls that bent the neck of a 7-year-old girl. Gifts meant not to honor her, but to hypnotize her family into forgetting what they were selling. And when the question was asked, "Do you consent?" a child's whisper became a mockery of free will. Consent at 7 is not choice. It is coercion written in holy ink. But here lies the darker truth. These ceremonies were not anomalies. They were blueprints. They revealed the architecture of control that has ruled civilizations for millennia: bind bloodlines with contracts, manipulate innocence with ritual, bury personal will beneath the word destiny. Religion played its part, muting dissent with scripture. Politics masked cruelty as necessity. And history itself became the accomplice, softening the edges until what should read as tragedy appears merely as tradition. This is the machine of power, faceless, ancient, relentless. It does not kill you with swords, it devours you with signatures. It does not need chains when it can convince you chains are holy. Agnes was not the first child taken by this system, and she would not be the last. She became its proof, that even the purest life can be rewritten, repurposed, and sacrificed for ambitions she could not even name. Remember this, institutions speak of honor, of God, of empire, but behind every polished word lies a transaction. And in that cathedral, Agnes was not married. She was sold. Imagine being 8 years old and told that your life is no longer your own. Every morning, Agnes awoke not to play, not to laughter, but to instruction. French tutors and Greek priests bent her days into the shape of a role she had not chosen. Her language, her manner, even the way she was told to breathe, everything was stripped of innocence and reconstructed into performance. Childhood was erased, replaced with lessons in posture, silence, obedience. This was not education. It was indoctrination. A child was not simply prepared to enter a foreign empire, she was unmade and remade, her identity dismantled piece by piece until nothing of the girl remained except the shell required for Byzantium's survival. She learned to prostrate before icons she barely understood, to smile without smiling, to speak with tones so soft they erased her presence. Her small frame was cloaked in garments too heavy for her bones, training her body to feel the weight of duty long before she could comprehend its meaning. This is how institutions break you, not with violence that leaves scars, but with rituals that burrow into the mind, teaching you that your will is irrelevant, your desires a sin. They take your voice and call it humility. They take your innocence and call it preparation. And slowly, you begin to believe them. That is the real prison, when you internalize the script they hand you, when you forget the sound of your own soul beneath the endless chorus of what you are told to be. Agnes was not just a girl in training, she was a child taught to erase herself. When her Greek tutors corrected her speech, they were not just teaching language, they were erasing memory. When she bowed before foreign symbols, she was not worshipping, she was surrendering. Each lesson was a blade, not of steel, but of silence. And silence cuts deepest when it convinces you that your own thoughts are unworthy. This is the hidden machinery of power: break the spirit early, and obedience follows for life. Strip away choice, replace it with ritual, and you never need chains. The prisoner will walk willingly into the cage, believing it is sacred duty. By the time Agnes prepared to leave France, she was no longer a child at all. She was an instrument, trained to serve an empire she had never seen, bound not by love, not by faith, but by the psychological leash of indoctrination. When Agnes crossed the threshold into Constantinople, the world shifted. France, with its grey stone halls and narrow courtyards, was gone. In its place rose a city unlike anything her young eyes had ever known, marble columns gleaming under sunlight, mosaics that glowed like captured fire, domes painted with saints that seemed to watch from every corner. But beauty can be a weapon, and here it was sharpened into intimidation. The Byzantines understood that awe is control. The city was not meant to welcome her, it was meant to overwhelm her, to crush whatever fragments of self she still carried across the sea. The boy she was married to, Alexios too, barely 13, was as much a victim as she was. His crown weighed heavier than his body could bear. Surrounded by advisors, generals, and courtiers who whispered poison into his ears, he was emperor in name only. Agnes, barely tall enough to reach his shoulder, was placed beside him like an ornament. Two children presented as rulers of one of the greatest empires on earth. It was theater again, but this time on a stage that spanned continents. And yet, even children can sense the truth. Alexios trembled in her presence, not from fear of her, but from the knowledge that he, too, was caught in the gears of a machine designed to consume them both. He would not survive it. Within months, he would be dead, sacrificed to the endless struggle for power that rotted the empire from within. Agnes, not even 12, would be left widowed, isolated, and still bound by the same system that had stolen her life before it began. Here is the unspoken truth of empire: it devours its own young first. The Byzantine court dressed its rituals in gold, but behind those walls lurked shadows. Poisoners. Generals hungry for thrones. priests willing to twist scripture into chains. And when the boy emperor collapsed beneath the weight of his crown, Agnes did not inherit freedom. She inherited new shackles. In this moment, you see the genius of corruption. They did not need to kill Agnes. They needed her alive, breathing, compliant, presentable. A living trophy passed from one man to the next, a banner draped in silk and pearls, reminding everyone that even the innocent are property if the empire wills it so. What happened next was worse than childhood marriage. It was the calculated decision to bind her to a man 50 years her senior, a man who understood power not as duty, but as possession. Agnes was 12 years old when the empire decided she must wed again. This time, there was no boy standing beside her. No trembling hands. No innocent eyes. Instead, a man more than 60 years her senior, Andronikos Komnenos, stepped forward. A man whose name dripped with both fear and desire, known for charm that disarmed enemies and cruelty that silenced them forever. He had spent his life plotting, seducing, betraying, and now, with the emperor dead, he took not only the throne but the child who symbolized its legitimacy. Imagine the weight of that moment. You are 12. Your body is still learning its shape, your mind still clings to fragments of play, yet now you are handed to a man whose beard is gray, whose hands are rough with decades of violence, whose eyes see not a girl, but a seal of authority to justify his reign. It was not marriage. It was conquest. Agnes became the final prize in a lifetime of manipulation, the jewel that allowed Andronikos to parade himself not as a usurper, but as an emperor chosen by God. This is the most disturbing face of institutional corruption. It wears legitimacy like a mask. The priests blessed the union. The nobles bowed their heads. The empire whispered that this was destiny, ordained by heaven itself. But beneath the incense, beneath the gold crowns, the truth was raw and undeniable. This was the consumption of innocence by a predator shielded by power. Here lies the lesson most men refuse to see: corruption does not survive by force alone. It survives because entire systems conspire to make the monstrous appear holy. The law signed the paper. The church sanctified the bed. The empire applauded its own treachery. And so a child was bound to a man older than her grandfather, while the world nodded in approval. You listening right now, you must understand. This is not only history. This is the template. Institutions still thrive on the same machinery: dress cruelty in ceremony, sanctify possession with law, disguise control as destiny. And unless you learn to see through the illusion, you will live as Agnes lived, bound to a fate written by others. If you are still here, you are different. You see the mask slipping. To mark your transformation, comment this phrase twice below: I will not be owned. Write it once for Agnes, and once for yourself. This is how you break the chain. Andronikos Komnenos ruled not as a leader, but as a shadow wearing a crown. He had clawed his way through exile, seduction, and rebellion, and now that he sat on the Byzantine throne, he unleashed a reign of terror that would burn his name into history's darkest margins. Agnes, 12 years old, already twice a bride, was forced to stand at his side as the empire watched itself descend into madness. She was not a partner. She was a shield. Her presence legitimized him, her youth softened the brutality he inflicted, her silence drowned out the screams echoing through Constantinople's streets. Andronikos understood one truth of control: fear is faster than loyalty. He purged the aristocracy with iron and fire, ordering executions so grotesque they bordered on spectacle. Nobles were dragged from their homes and blinded, their estates seized, their families shattered. Suspected traitors were impaled in public squares as reminders of what disobedience meant. Even the church, once untouchable, bent beneath his hand, its priests forced to bless violence as though it were scripture. And through it all, Agnes remained the unwilling witness. Every ceremony she attended, every procession where her face was shown to the crowds, was a performance designed to disguise savagery as stability. The child bride became the empire's mask. Behind her innocence, rivers of blood flowed. Behind her silence, 1,000 voices were silenced forever. This is the core of institutional corruption. It thrives not only on power, but on symbols. Andronikos did not just need soldiers or executions. He needed Agnes, her presence, her purity, her very existence, to cloak his brutality in legitimacy. Without her, he was a tyrant. With her, he could pretend to be chosen. This is how the system works, then and now. They take innocence and display it as proof that what they do is righteous. They force symbols into place until the masses forget to ask whether the symbol itself has a voice. But symbols can break. And the longer Andronikos reigned, the more cracks spread through his empire. Famine struck. Enemies pressed harder against Byzantine borders. The people, once too terrified to speak, began to whisper rebellion. And as the whispers grew, Agnes saw what perhaps she had known all along: no throne, no empire, no ritual is ever eternal. Even the most terrifying system eventually devours itself. Yet she remained trapped inside it, chained not by steel but by the weight of appearances. For Agnes, escape was not yet possible. She had to endure. To survive. To wait. Andronikos Komnenos believed fear would keep him eternal. But fear is a double-edged blade. It cuts obedience, and then it cuts revolt. In 1185, the blade turned. The people of Constantinople, once cowed into silence, rose with fury. Famine gnawed at their bellies. Foreign enemies pressed at their gates. And the emperor who had promised salvation had delivered only terror. The streets filled with the roar of rebellion, and the walls of power cracked beneath it. Agnes, now 13, stood in the palace as chaos consumed the city. She had been paraded as a wife, displayed as a queen, bound as a symbol, but when the tide turned, the symbol no longer protected the tyrant. Andronikos fled through secret passages, his once proud stride reduced to a desperate crawl. He was dragged into the streets, beaten, mutilated, torn apart by the very people who had once bowed to him. His reign ended not with ceremony, but with a mob's vengeance. For Agnes, it was revelation. Power, she now saw, was never about crowns or ceremonies. It was about perception. The same people who had accepted her marriage at 12 as holy now spat on the corpse of the man who orchestrated it. Institutions had dressed his violence in legitimacy, but the moment fear cracked, those same institutions abandoned him. The system protects itself, never the individuals who serve it. Agnes did not scream. She did not cry. She understood something most men never do: even at the end of their lives, survival does not belong to the strong, nor to the holy, but to the adaptable. She had been trained to bow, trained to silence herself, trained to embody obedience, and now those very lessons became her shield. By vanishing into silence, by letting others destroy themselves in pursuit of crowns, she endured. And that is the forbidden truth buried inside this story. Empires fall. Kings are torn apart. Institutions devour even their architects. But the system itself, this machinery of power, of corruption, of ritualized control, endures. It only shifts shape, wearing new masks, finding new innocence to consume. Agnes lived on, scarred but unbroken, long after the man who claimed her was dust. She bore witness to how history operates, not as progress, not as justice, but as repetition. Children are still sold. Innocence is still auctioned. Ritual still cloaks violence. And the world still nods, calling it destiny. If you have listened this far, you now carry the weight of this knowledge. The question is no longer what happened to Agnes. The question is what you will do, now that you see the machine for what it truly is.